Today, I will introduce a thrilling horror movie from 2019 called The Hole in the Ground. In Ireland, a single mother named Sarah and her son Chris moved to a house in the countryside to start a new life. During the trip, Sarah almost hit a stranger standing in the middle of the road. After making sure Chris was fine, Sarah got out of the car to check on the person. She discovered that it was Noreen, a strange old woman who kept whispering that he is not her son. Although Sarah tried to ask, Noreen didn't respond, only looking back at Chris with a haunting gaze. Sarah decided not to take any chances, retrieved the broken rearview mirror from the car and drove off with her son. Raising Chris alone was not easy for Sarah. Sometimes, they argued over small things, like Chris's picky eating habits. However, most of the time, their relationship was very close. Sarah always hugged Chris and told him that she loved him. They also had a little game, making funny faces to make each other laugh. One day, during lunch, Chris shouted in panic when he discovered a spider in the kitchen. Sarah caught the spider and released it outside, but Chris was upset about it, as he feared the spider might come back and be angry. Chris said that if it were his father, he would have killed the spider. Then, he asked why his father didn't come with them. This made it difficult for Sarah to explain, and she simply replied, "It's complicated." Which made Chris even angrier. He stomped on the spider, called his mother a liar, and ran into the forest. Sarah hurriedly followed him, feeling the strong wind picking up as she ventured deeper into the woods. Sarah was shocked to discover something strange and terrifying. A huge deep hole right in front of her. Before she could decide what to do, Chris appeared behind her, apologizing for mentioning his father, knowing it made his mother sad. Sarah hugged him and took him away, not wanting him to see the hole. The following night, Sarah noticed that the back door was not closed. Feeling unsafe, she immediately locked the door before going to bed. Chris started attending a new school, but he had difficulty making friends. One day, he received a flyer about the upcoming talent show at school. Sarah encouraged him to sign up, as it might help him get to know his classmates. However, Chris was still hesitant and unsure. Later, Sarah attended a dinner party with a few new friends, including Louise, her boss. While everyone shared strange stories, Sarah learned more about Noreen. Noreen was considered crazy in the eyes of the townspeople. One day, many years ago, she stormed into her son's classroom, shouting and causing a commotion, and it took 3 teachers to drag her out. Afterward, Noreen's son was transferred to another school, and she was sent to a psychiatric institution. However, when Noreen was released from the hospital months later, she drove her car into her son. Everyone is still unsure whether it was an accident or a deliberate act. When she got home, Sarah couldn't sleep. She felt anxious because of the strange noises in the house and the strong wind outside. Suddenly, a door slammed shut. Sarah quickly ran out of her room to check on Chris, but she couldn't find him in his bed or anywhere in the house. In panic, Sarah rushed downstairs and discovered the back door wide open. The feeling of anxiety made her grab a flashlight and run outside, searching for Chris in the late night. The forest was dark and mysterious, making it impossible for Sarah to stay long in it. When she heard strange noises, she became terrified and hurried back to the house, then called the police. However, Sarah hung up when she suddenly turned around and found Chris standing at the door of his bedroom, saying that he had been there the whole time. The next day, Sarah visited a doctor, who asked if she had a history of anxiety and examined the scar on her forehead, a wound from an accident a year ago. The doctor decided to prescribe Sarah some tranquilizers, advising her to take them before going to bed. When she got home, Sarah was startled to see Chris appear in the kitchen just a second after she called him, making her even more certain that she was dealing with anxiety issues. So she started taking the medication before going to bed. The next morning, Sarah woke up and discovered that Chris had brought a bouquet of flowers from the garden. After scolding him for going outside without permission, Sarah accepted the flowers and hugged her son. The next day, when Sarah picked up Chris from school, she noticed that he had made many friends, including a boy who used to tease him. On their way home, they encountered Noreen standing in the middle of the road. Both Noreen and Chris couldn't take their eyes off each other. Sarah honked the horn, but it had no effect, so she decided to get out of the car and ask Noreen to move, only to discover that she was whispering again. This time, Noreen said that he was not her son. They were suddenly interrupted by Des, Noreen's husband, who apologized to Sarah for not keeping an eye on his wife. Taking advantage of the distraction, Noreen went to the car and started banging on the passenger side window, shouting that it was not her son. Without wasting time, Sarah immediately drove off as Des pulled his wife back to stop her from chasing them. The next morning, when Sarah was taking Chris to school, she decided to stop by Noreen's house, only to find that she had died on the ground, her head buried in the dirt. Later, when the police came to Sarah's house to take a statement, Sarah noticed one of the officers' arm wrestling with Chris. She suddenly thought she saw Chris using abnormal strength to win and even breaking the officer's arm, but in the end, it was just her imagination. Then, Sarah went to the bathroom and noticed that the scar on her forehead had started bleeding for no apparent reason. The next day, when Sarah went to work, Louise was the first to mention Noreen's death. Sarah quickly changed the subject to motherhood, confessing that sometimes she looked at Chris and didn't recognize him anymore. Louise reassured her that this was completely normal, just something that mothers had to get used to as their children grew up quickly. Later, Sarah attended Noreen's funeral at her house, where she discovered dozens of mirrors hanging in every room. However, today, all of them were covered with black cloth. Sarah went to offer her condolences to Des, and while they were drinking together, Sarah took the opportunity to ask why Noreen had said that Chris was not her son. Des explained that after his son's 8th birthday, Noreen began noticing small changes in his behavior and gradually believed that he was an imposter. However, it wasn't Noreen who killed the boy, but Des, who hadn't seen him on the road while driving. As time passed, Sarah tried her best to get back to her daily life. One day, while running through the forest, she found Chris's favorite action figure lying on the ground. Feeling worried, she decided to check the deep hole where the strange whispers had been coming from. Then, at lunch, Sarah was shocked to see Chris eagerly eating foods he used to hate. She decided to confront him about the toy. Chris denied leaving the house, but when Sarah showed him the action figure, she firmly demanded that he tell the truth. Chris, angered, used abnormal strength to push the table toward her, leaving Sarah stunned. When he realized what he had done, he immediately apologized and ran upstairs to his room. As night fell, Sarah heard strange noises coming from Chris's room. She approached, peering through the keyhole in the crack in the door to observe. The sight terrified Sarah. Chris was moving around the room like an animal, crawling on his hands and knees. He even caught a spider and ate it. This was too much for Sarah to bear, and she quickly rushed back to her room. When Chris came to check, Sarah simply said, "Good night," as usual. The next day, Sarah took Chris to the doctor. After the examination, the doctor found nothing unusual, but Sarah explained that Chris's behavior was changing. However, the doctor was more concerned about Sarah's mental health and asked if the scar on her forehead was caused by Chris's father rather than an accident. Later, Sarah decided to buy a video camera and hide it in the wall of Chris's room. That night, Sarah decided to stop taking the tranquilizers. The next morning, Chris continued to eat large amounts of food. Sarah apologized for her recent confusion, and Chris responded by touching her scar, even pressing on it forcefully. Fortunately, it was just a nightmare. In the afternoon, Sarah went to watch the talent show at Chris's school. Chris's class was performing a choral song, and the song was about a swamp. Suddenly, the room darkened, and everyone around her disappeared, leaving only Sarah and Chris standing on stage. Chris then began reciting the lyrics in an emotionless voice. Sarah panicked and ran out of the auditorium, but she couldn't find any doors open to escape. Finally, Louise found her and asked what was wrong, and Sarah simply replied, "Chris is not my son." As for Chris, he arrived at that moment with the teacher. Sarah panicked and ran away again, but this time she succeeded in leaving the building and returning home. There, she retrieved the video camera to check what had been recorded. What she found in the footage was truly terrifying. Sarah decided to go meet Des. He invited her into the house again and explained that all the mirrors in the house had been hung by Noreen. Because only mirrors could reveal the truth, and she always wanted to make sure that her husband was the real one. Sarah showed Des the footage and told him that the issues his son had faced were now happening to Chris. However, Des refused to acknowledge that his son had problems and angrily threw the camera on the floor, breaking it. Des refused to admit that he had seen anything on the tape and walked away. He also refused to call Sarah crazy, as she had said. Sarah returned home to retrieve the SD card from the camera. At that time, Chris was already at home and waiting for her. He didn't like being left alone, so Sarah explained that she had left because she was feeling unwell. Chris hugged his mother to comfort her. At dinner, Sarah revealed that she had put tranquilizers in Chris's food, and this time, he ate a dish he used to dislike. After the meal, Sarah invited Chris to play their favorite game, but it was clear that he no longer remembered the game. Sarah looked at him and said that he was not her son. At that moment, the monster impersonating Chris screeched and attacked Sarah, throwing her around the kitchen several times until she lost consciousness. A while later, Sarah woke up and found the monster dragging her across the floor, intending to bury her head just like it had done to Noreen. Fortunately, the tranquilizers started to take effect, and the monster passed out, allowing Sarah to avoid being buried too deeply and enabling her to escape. Sarah brought Chris back home and left him in the basement. She used a broken mirror to examine his face. The sight she saw was terrifying, with strange dents on his face, proving that this was a monster in disguise. When the monster woke up, it attacked Sarah again. Even with its superior strength, Sarah easily pushed the body of a child aside when the monster let out a horrifying demon-like scream. Sarah quickly ran upstairs and locked the door. When the monster no longer chased her, she could focus on finding the real Chris. She grabbed a flashlight and ran into the forest, heading toward the deep hole. She allowed herself to be swallowed by the hole until she fell into an underground tunnel. The space here was very narrow, but Sarah kept crawling until she reached a larger cave. There, she found many human bones and also discovered Chris unconscious. She immediately picked him up and prepared to leave. However, Sarah realized they were not alone. A group of faceless monsters was waking up and getting ready to chase them. The tunnel grew even narrower as Sarah had to drag Chris, but at least this meant that only one monster could enter the tunnel at a time. One shapeshifter managed to grab Sarah's wrist, copying her face, but Sarah hit it with the flashlight until she broke free. When they got out of the hole, Sarah checked Chris again and confirmed he was still alive. When Chris woke up, they immediately ran back home. Sarah realized that the car door was locked tightly and left Chris next to the car. She went inside to get the keys and heard a fake Chris calling her name from the basement. With no other choice, Sarah decided to set the house on fire before leaving with Chris in the car. Weeks later, Sarah and Chris began a new and happy life in the city. Sarah always carefully took pictures of Chris to check his face, and their new home had dozens of mirrors hanging on every wall. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss exciting videos like this one. Thank you for watching.